Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webcast on digital ecosystems help drive efficiency in the new era. My name is Manoj Gunti. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Google Cloud's Apigee API Management Platform. Before we begin the webcast, I just wanted to cover very quickly a few housekeeping details. At the bottom of your screen, there is a ribbon with multiple engagement tools you can use for this webcast. All the windows that appear in your console are resizable and movable, so feel free to adjust them as you like. You can expand your slide area to maximize it to full screen by clicking one of the arrows, and be sure to hit slides at the bottom ribbon to view the slide content. Additional resource material are available in the resources window at the right side of your screen. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you may find useful. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there might be no dialing numbers. At any time during the session, if you have any questions for any of the speakers, feel free to post them in the Q&A console. We will try to answer all the questions, as many as possible, towards the end of the webcast. But if we are running out of time, please feel free to email any of the speakers, or you can email to apigee-up-close@google.com. Please know we do capture all questions, and if we are not able to answer all the questions today, we will take the time offline to respond to you, and it will be sent over an email. For any technical issues you may be having, consider refreshing your screen or logging in and logging out as you need. With that, let's get started. So joining me today are Adriana Gregory and Edward Cohn from Oxford Research. Hi, Adriana. Hi, Ed.
Hi, Manoj. Nice to be here today.
Adriana, where are you based out of?
So today I am in Georgia, and I am staying with family here and have been for a few months now. Oxford Economics office are in New York, and I am down here for a while. What about you?
I'm based out of California. Thanks for asking. It's been really crazy over here for the last couple of weeks, but things are now getting back to normal, so very happy about that. Ed, what about you? Where are you based out of?
Well, like Adriana, I'm a road warrior these days. I have been based at various times in North Carolina and New York. I spent the last 6 months in the beautiful state of Vermont, and I am now back in North Carolina for the moment. I know it looks like I'm in a police station getting a lineup picture taken, but I'm actually in a hotel room. And I'm glad the smoke is gone in California. I know you guys really went through a lot out there.
Yep. That was one difficult week. Thank you both for joining us. I know it's going to be a great conversation. With that, let's get started. So the agenda for the webcast today is that we wanted to set the context in terms of the research that Google Cloud recently did in partnership with Oxford Economics, basically to understand how CIOs of various businesses, large, medium, and small, across various geographies, are able to accelerate digital transformation through a digital ecosystem strategy. So we will understand a little bit more about what a digital ecosystem means for an enterprise, why it is super important, and understand from Adriana and Ed on the research methodology that was used to conduct this survey. We will take a closer look at the research results, more specifically around the research results for the APAC region and what some of the CIOs are talking about their digital ecosystem strategy. And after that, we will open it up for Q&A and take some of the questions from the audience. With that, let me hand it over to Adriana to cover a little bit more about the survey.
Thanks, Manoj. And yes, thanks everyone for joining today. Ed and I are looking forward to giving you the results of this research program, and specifically how the results played out in the Asia Pacific region. This slide just gives you an overview of the methodology for the survey that we did. We went out to 1,000 chief information officers around the world, including Singapore and Australia, in an effort to understand their digital business ecosystem strategies. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a few moments, but I do want to take a moment to put the results in context of what's happening now in the broader world. The survey data was collected in early 2020, largely before, the tumultuous times that have followed. But we think that the results are still really relevant in the new landscape because they can help us understand how CIOs have been building these partnerships to achieve their strategic goals and what tactics they can apply to maintain operations right now and hopefully position for future growth and innovation as well. But before we really dive into the results, I do want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say digital business ecosystems. And Ed, I know you love to give that introduction, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Adriana. Very kind of you. We use the term digital ecosystem, and it's really an idea that is as simple at heart as our conversation with Manoj starting, right? We're a vendor to Google Cloud, and we are sharing information seamlessly and digitally, in this case, digital video and this presentation. It's a very simple example of the idea that all parts of a business across its network of vendors, suppliers, customers, and maybe even out to competitors and regulators, everybody can and should be sharing information now. Data should be flowing. And the idea of a digital business ecosystem obviously is modeled on a biological ecosystem where every player has a part and every player has a role that may be as simple as predator and prey. But in our friendly ecosystem, we probably aren't encountering that quite as much. But you're relating, you're sharing data, and you're creating ways of working together that will, as we'll see, result in better outcomes for those companies that are able to do this effectively, to see across all parts of their business ecosystem and manage effectively and share data effectively across that broad range of relationships.
And thanks, Ed. That's a good description of what we were looking into here. And I want to point out that that's how we wanted to present it to our survey respondents as well. We didn't want to come to them with, our terms for this. We wanted to really understand the types of partnerships that they have in place, and then once we're analyzing the data, be able to say who we think qualifies as a respondent that has the most advanced approach to this kind of ecosystem strategy. So that's what you're looking at here. We used our survey results to segment out a group of respondents that demonstrated more mature strategies in terms of those business relationships. We used three basic themes to define this group. One was the focus on innovation. The respondents, in order to qualify for this group, had to say that their external business relationships enhance digital innovation. The second qualification criteria was about the kind of connections that they had with partners and how they managed them. So they reported that their key business partnerships are fully connected and collaborative, and that they actively manage those relationships. And the third criteria was about the depth of those business relationships. So when we asked them about how they work with their partners, they said that those partnerships are integrated and that they have close collaboration across the network for the benefit of everyone involved. So again, those are three areas that we think define the successful digital business ecosystem, and then we use those to segment out a leader group that you'll see throughout the presentation. Also, whenever we talk about this leader group, we'll be focusing on the results globally, since a relatively small number of respondents qualified for this group. But we do think that the results are going to be applicable in the APAC region as well.
Absolutely. And Adriana, I teased it in my introduction to ecosystems, and we have it here as well. Just mentioned that these leaders, the companies that are advanced in the criteria we've shown here, are getting greater value, business value, than their peers, than their competitors. And as we move through the slides, we'll unpack just what that value is, and why, in other words, why it really matters to be an ecosystem leader.
Right. So let's start out by talking through some of the results from our survey. And first, we'll focus on some of the goals that CIOs have in place and how they're, using their partnerships to power innovation.
Sure, Adriana, that was something that I was going to bring up. So what are some of the top goals that you see from CIOs that you have surveyed, and how do you see these goals going to change in the near future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it speaks to our approach when we design a survey like this. We always like to start out by understanding, the broader organizational goals that executives have for their whole business, rather than just the particular areas that we're focusing on in the survey. And you'll see some slides that follow basically talking about what those strategic goals are. And, as you'll see, even before the pandemic was top of mind, efficiency was important, which makes sense. It's an evergreen goal. But of course, they're still focused on revenue growth and customer satisfaction as well. It would be interesting to see how the strategic goals changed over time. And I think, if you surveyed them today, perhaps efficiency would be even more important. But thanks for jumping ahead to this. This is, of course, one of the findings I was just mentioning. When we asked what the overall strategic and operational goals are most important today, you can see that efficiency and profitability are ranked first, above even growth and customer satisfaction and hiring and developing skilled talent. Not to say that those aren't important. You can see that, we've made that left-hand set of donut charts larger because they're what we're talking about here, but it's not to scale. Those other goals are important to CIOs we surveyed as well. And this is an interesting point because, when we first started analyzing the data, we were, it was still before COVID-19 had really taken hold, at least in the United States. And we were focusing more on the strategic goals like growth and customer satisfaction. And Ed and I both, when we were looking at the data set together, just kind of passed over efficiency and profitability. But once it became clear what kind of new business environment everyone was operating in, we realized that these things are going to become even more important. And it's not just that they're, the main priority, but it's also going to be the focus of innovation and the focus of partnerships, the things that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, we were really excited. Nobody takes efficiency and profitability for granted, but they're a given. All businesses need to run efficiently. They need to be profitable to survive. And so we were really focused on those right-hand metrics and revenue growth. That was the era, believe it or not, just 7 months ago, what we were calling out as the key finding and forward-looking, especially improving customer satisfaction. Was going to grow. It was already important. It was going to grow as a key goal for businesses, revenue growth. And obviously those things are hugely important now. The strategic emphasis will remain there, but efficiency has gone from of course we do that, to if we want to remain in business in this pandemic environment and beyond, it's got to be job one. And so it's just interesting the way a world historic event can reshape priorities and emphases.
Yes, and even when we did survey them before all of this, you could see that goal flowing through into innovation as well. So already it is kind of front and center as the strategic priority. You can see that 42% said that increasing operational efficiency best defined their core goal for innovation, and that's a big gap from other answers, choices that we provided to respondents, like improving employee engagement or being an industry leader, or even solving a big picture issue. And you might have seen some of those things change. I wouldn't be surprised to see more focused on the kind of big picture issues that we're talking about. And yeah, it would be interesting to refield this.
This to me, Adriana, is almost a line. And obviously it's emphasized now all the more that innovation is to increase operational efficiency. But what I see in these numbers is, we think about innovation, we think about new products and services and market share and all that great stuff, and pleasing customers and interacting with your customers and employees and your vendors and so on. But none of that's going to work if you're not efficient and digital in your operations. And so this is a bit of a timeline, in that this is the baseline. You better be able to do your core operations, or else the rest of it's not going to work. And I think with the pressure from the economic situation, this is all the more true today.
Thanks, Ed. So getting more into the focused questions in our survey, which talked about the role of business partnerships and how those are changing over time. These charts show you a look at the percentage of respondents in APAC who reported an increase in the number of close working relationships over the past 3 years, and also those that expect an increase in that number of relationships over the next 3 years. And you can say that those are pretty high numbers, where most saw partnerships increasing, in the years prior, and even more expecting that to increase in the years ahead. So kind of an acceleration there. And it's not just the number of relationships we're talking about, it's also the depth of those partnerships. This twin question here is about just that. So 54% reported an increase in the depth of relationships over the past 3 years, and then a huge jump in the next 3 years. So we're going to see those relationships go a little bit away from the transactional nature and into more of a close collaboration that's really aimed at working together and getting, mutual benefits from these partnerships.
Right, and you'll see this again and again in the study. We didn't lead the respondents to talk about ecosystems. We didn't impose that bit of nomenclature on them and say, tell us about your ecosystems. We really addressed the components that we see as essential to an ecosystem, and then worked up from there. So you can see the questions are about relationships, really partnerships, and the nature and depth of those, and over the accumulation of data from the survey that adds up to an ecosystem. But we'll see that again as we move on into technology, how we structured it. We never want to tell respondents what we want from them. We want to find out what they're up to, and then put it in an intelligible frame.
Right. And when we talk about the types of partnerships that organizations we surveyed are using, we're seeing a huge growth in partnerships with technology providers, partners and suppliers, developers, which could be within the organization or external to the organization. We'll talk about those more later on in the presentation. And even that last line, other organizations within the industry. So the thought of, doing some collaborative work with what could be a competitor is, I think, really interesting right now. And, these are, of course, the numbers for Asia Pacific. It's a similar trend to what we saw in other regions that we surveyed around the world. And I think the fact that this is happening globally maybe indicates that, not all these partnerships are happening locally. A lot of them are happening across borders too, which just adds a whole separate element here that we can talk about the best strategies for managing those partnerships.
Right, risk and opportunity.
Right. But, so the past few slides, Ed and I have been talking so much about how we didn't want to define ecosystem for our respondents. We wanted to talk about number of relationships, about the depth of those relationships, and then determine ourselves, once we're analyzing the data, whether or not those really qualify as what we think of as a digital business ecosystem. This is another question where we wanted to get a sense of how those relationships are managed. And like other regions around the world, in Asia Pacific, we see that, it's not that these relationships tend to be completely separate. You can see that the small blue slice there is, only accounting for 8% there. Half of respondents are working collaboratively with other organizations, but still most are not necessarily managing those partnerships strategically. But I don't know. I mean, Ed, we talk a lot about whether a number is high or low. That 42% of respondents saying that their relationships are fully connected and collaborative and that they're actively managed across the ecosystem. That actually seems pretty high to me. And I believe that number is higher than what we're some other regions too.
Yeah, companies have had years to develop their digital connections and the management styles that enable that full cooperation. My guess here, Adriana, is that what defines fully connected in 2020 or 2021 probably will seem not fully connected with the perspective of, say, 2030. In other words, it's a moving target. So we didn't want to lead people. We didn't want to say, do you have an ecosystem here? We have maybe 40, 42% saying we have something that sure looks like an ecosystem, a developed ecosystem, but we are in early days. And my guess is that people will look back and say, oh, I thought I was good at it, but with some of the tools that I guess we're about to discuss and the evolution of new technologies, management philosophies, skill sets, attitudes of workers, regulators, all these things, that 42% these are people who are good at it by today's standards. So I as we've seen throughout this study, business results are a moving target. So I think 42% is high, but I don't think 42% have reached, that ultimate era of where they can just relax and say, we've figured this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all more on the strategy side, right? So, and we all agree that technology plays a very important role in actually putting the strategy into action and actually executing it. So I just wanted to understand a little bit more about what technologies are CIOs using to manage their business ecosystems and how might those strategies change in the future?
Sure. So, Oxford Economics does a lot of research, a lot of research into CIO perspectives in particular. And so we have Ed and I talk a lot about what emerging technologies are going to be most important. And I think it's important to note, and Ed, you can talk about this a bit more, but when we set out to test a research program, we're not trying to lead respondents in any way to a particular answer choice. So when we talk about certain technologies here, these are the things that naturally came to the top of the list. So we see things like artificial intelligence as important too, but you'll also frequently see APIs listed as as a top priority for CIOs in managing these partnerships and API management systems.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't include vendor names. We don't include product names or service names in our surveys. We want to find out what people are doing. And obviously, we work closely with our ecosystem partner to understand what it is they do for a living, what services they provide, and what the stories that are going to make them happy would be. And so we're well aware of that, but it doesn't do anybody any good to game the system and say, let's build a questionnaire that's going to make our sponsors at Google Cloud happy. Let's find out what's actually going on. And as it turns out, spoiler alert, get a little ahead of ourselves, we found some stuff that really is going to make our sponsor very happy because, Adriana, as you well know, the services that sort of core that Google Cloud is providing is vitally important. And we'll unpack this a little bit. It's a big dramatic number, and then we'll get into that a little bit. But it's a pretty hot story.
Right. When we asked respondents in Asia Pacific how critical various factors are to making business relationships productive and valuable, application programming interfaces was cited as very important or important by over half of respondents. So putting it at the top of the list of other factors that we asked about. And this is a trend that you see globally as well. But yeah, this technology comes out as even more important than things like quantifying an investment needed or measuring performance or, focusing on the kind of partnership between IT and the rest of the business. That's not to say that those things aren't important, but we just found it interesting that APIs rose to the top of the list there.
Yeah, and statistically, they're about the same. I mean, honestly, the 52 to 49, with I think a sample size of this size, it's not vastly ahead of the game, but it's right there at the top of the list. Right.
And when we asked how important they are to interactions and data sharing with various entities, we saw that the top responses tended to be developers, customers, and other organizations in their industry. So we found those as interesting, and particularly because of the innovation focus that we have in our survey. It's easy to see how these technologies might connect you to other entities that are going to help you develop products and services or respond to change.
Yeah, Adriana, you mentioned earlier how important that developer story is. I just think with developer talent dispersed around the world, people working the way we're working right now, and as you mentioned, the focus on innovation, that's another pretty hot story there.
Right. And we also asked respondents how much they really use these technologies. So in Asia Pacific, about a quarter of respondents said that APIs are in use at scale, and another 58% saying they're in use in some capacity. So that puts it in line with a lot of other technologies like IoT and mobile. And I think one thing that Ed and I have talked about is the gap between that darker blue green there, that they're saying that they're in use at scale, and those that they're saying they're in use somewhere in the organization. So that to us suggests that, maybe there are pockets of expertise or certain areas of the business where they're used a lot, but maybe not adopted across the organization just yet.
Yeah, and it puts that first slide in perspective, right? It's like, again, we're not going to come back to our client and say, you're done, you won, everybody's using managed API platforms, because that's not what we're seeing. We are seeing interest, demand, and adoption. And then, as you just pointed out, Adriana, it makes sense also that it would be somewhat siloed within an organization. Maybe it isn't for every part, but at first, but there's still plenty of room to grow and mature.
Sure. And that applies to API management systems as well. We asked how organizations are, organizing this at the moment and how they expect to in 3 years. And you can see in Asia Pacific, maybe a quarter don't have a management platform in place today, but that's expected to go down to 13% in 3 years. You see more people moving towards having that management platform. And this is where we'll start to talk about the leader group that we mentioned at the start of the presentation today. So just to remind you, these are the respondents that qualified for the criteria that we set that we think defined a more mature digital business ecosystem. And once we had that group segmented out, we looked at how their respondents compared to everyone else in the survey sample. So these are global numbers because the group is relatively small, just 96% of the 1,000 CIOs we surveyed qualified. But there is representation from APAC within this group too.
Adriana, how many qualified?
I think it was under 10%.
Yeah, I heard you say 96%. Could be our connection. I think you meant 9. Yeah, so that's for the folks at home. Maybe I misheard it, so my apologies. But these folks sure do love data sharing and APIs.
Just actually 94 respondents.
Okay, number of respondents. So under 10% of our sample, and as I was just saying, they really love data sharing and APIs.
Right. You can see in this question, we asked how critical various factors are to making their relationships productive and valuable. And the leader group, there's a big gap between them and other respondents in terms of how important they think strong partnerships between IT and business are, what the role of APIs is, and also data sharing and strong security practices. They're also more likely to have a central API management platform in place. So this chart's a lot to look at, but you can see the today numbers on the left and in 3 years on the right. And that top set of bars on the right-hand side, 82% of our leader group expecting to have a central management platform in place within 3 years versus just 41% of others. So they seem to be ahead of the curve, not just in general use of these, but also in how they manage them. They also see APIs as more important to their interactions and data sharing with customers, with developers, with other organizations in their industry, and just in general with partners and vendors as well.
And as we often see, Adriana, these leaders, it's an emerging discipline. They're not always ahead or way ahead in every metric. And that's something we see in study after study.
That's right. So we'll come back to that group in a bit, but for now we can transition into the next section.
Sure, and this kind of paints the bigger picture really well. And what we really wanted to understand is what is the next step for the CIOs, and what should they be doing, or what are they planning to do to build better digital business ecosystems?
I think that's a great question. I think we've talked a lot in the previous section about technology. We spent a lot of time talking about APIs, but I think there are things that go well beyond that too in terms of the organizational culture that you have even to support these types of partnerships and the processes that you have in place to work well with everyone in the ecosystem and to share data securely and effectively. So I think there's so many things that should be in place in order to get full value from these partnerships. And I think as you'll see in the coming slides, people are still making progress in those areas.
Yeah, and I mean, again, back to us, the way we're working today, and the way all of us, I'm sure on this call, have worked over the last 7 months, that's a great indication of the cultural shifts, the process shifts, the managerial emphasis shifts that are required to really open up the business, move that data sharing, make it part of your daily life. nothing new about a webinar, nothing new about a video chat, but to make it our prime method of communication, the amount of data we share internally, the dispersed workforce. This is the kind of stuff that has to be done at scale and purposefully to make all the tech stuff and strategy stuff we've talked about actually fly.
Right. And you can see that not everyone is there yet. And I think that's pretty relatable. I mean, in Asia Pacific, just about a third have said that they've, increased their level of collaboration with business partners or facilitated collaboration within the business. And I mean, this is, again, these numbers are pretty in line with what we saw in other regions as well. So it's not particularly alarming for the Asia Pacific region, I don't think. It seems to be on par with others. But I do think that, I mean, it points to a disconnect between what we saw in some of the earlier slides about the increasing strategic importance of partnerships, because there's clearly a kind of lag in terms of actually getting the organization to change around this new way of working.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is, we all know culture eats strategy for lunch. If you don't set up your people to succeed, all the tech in the world is not going to help them. And another thought on this one, Adriana, is of all the stats we're sharing today, I really would love to see this as a post-pandemic number, because I'll bet that investment in training, I'll bet the facilitating collaboration, I'll bet those numbers have gone up in the last 6 or 7 months. They sure should have.
Definitely. I mean, and even the leader group that we've been talking about has some work to do, or they did before the pandemic. Yeah, I mean, they are ahead in terms of increasing transparency into the business and sharing data with other members of the ecosystem. But in other areas, they're on par, or even lagging the others. So this is a problem that affects everyone. I think there's a lot of work to be done to change strategies.
Yeah, our leaders tend to be leaders on the big think and on the tech. But when it gets down to the day-to-day managing people and processes, they're down with the rest of us.
Yep. And
Sure.
Skills are a really important part of this too. And it's something that, again, it's a global problem. You can see here that we've shown the APAC results versus all others. And it seems like most have not taken the steps that they need to take in order to close the skills gaps. So under half saying that they've communicated strategic priorities with the organization, or changing the types of skills that they pursue in their candidates, or adjusting their workforce and retention strategies as well.
So what is go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that this goes back to the idea that, say, that 42% who said they're fully connected, or the fact that we're asking questions about what comprises an ecosystem without talking about ecosystems as an formed idea. I don't think that many companies, even the leaders, are saying we are consciously adopting a management strategy that enables and fosters this way of management and seeks these benefits. I think it's not, the system is not self-aware yet.
Sure.
Right.
So where do CIOs see the future of digital business ecosystems, and how do they want to take it forward?
So I think I'd like to answer this by going right to the next slide, actually, because we see really high expectations for the role that these partnerships are going to play in supporting business goals. You see that, 3/4 of our Asia Pacific respondents expect these relationships to support innovation and financial performance, which I'm sure both have become all the more important since the survey was even fielded. Automation and innovation and market intelligence too, both important. So just across the board, I think these relationships are expected to play a big role. And even, the bottom number on this list, agility, I mean, it looks small because it's at the end of the list, but that's still almost 2/3 of respondents saying that they'll be supported in that area. And that's one of the questions that also I would like to see a refresh of, because I think it's definitely more top of mind now. And we also wanted to find out not just what the role of relationships are, but also how APIs are supporting those goals as well. And you can see here that, organizations are already using APIs to collect and analyze usage statistics, or to share data and information with developers, or to focus on security. A smaller number say that they're generating revenue from APIs, but this is in line with what we see in other Oxford economics research too, where revenue and growth tend to be the last payoff. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming years as well.
Remember, Adriana, way back on I think our second data slide, where I said it was almost a timeline, that you have that initial investment and the focus is on efficiency and productivity, and then those cool things you can do once you're efficient and productive start to come a bit later. And as you say, we see that all the time. And it, frankly, it disappoints our clients sometimes, because they want to be able to go out and say, these technologies, these services will help you on the bottom line and the top line. And of course, that is the ultimate goal of business. But to get there, you have to take a couple of steps. And, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think the entire data set leads us to that conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that probably you're going to get closer to those steps as the different technologies that we're talking about and the processes we're talking about get more intertwined. We saw that specifically when we talked about the application of AI to APIs. So as that's more incorporated into API ecosystems, respondents in Asia Pacific are expecting to be better able to automate their operations, or collect higher quality data or increase efficiency. So again, getting back to kind of the core goals that we saw at the start of this presentation.
Yeah, and you mentioned other research. We've done some really cool, really deep stuff with our economists on AI, and it's the same story. Your benefits start in process efficiency and in sort of function level benefits, and then you get to the financial payoff.
Right. And speaking of payoff, now I think it's time to talk about what our leader group really gets in terms of results. So one of this first set of areas that we're looking at here is really about the kind of softer metrics that we saw as particularly important to responsiveness in the current business environment. So we saw that our digital business ecosystem leaders reported stronger effectiveness in terms of supply chain flexibility, their relationships with customers, their readiness for regulation, and also their understanding of market conditions. So those areas we think are, of course, going to be really important to how everyone responds to the kind of challenges ahead. So, if a leader was more effective in terms of supply chain flexibility, maybe that meant that they were better able to deal with the kind of disruption that they saw in a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier because of COVID-19, or maybe they were even able to completely change what they were doing in order to, make a new product that was needed. Like there's been examples floating around, like of a manufacturer shifting to make PPE, for example, when it may not have ordinarily done so. Similarly, I think you can see that value in relationships with customers. Those that are better able to maintain those relationships and understand what their customers need, which is going to be especially dynamic right now, I think are going to be better positioned to, maintain their performance in the current landscape. And it's not just about these kind of softer areas. We also looked at things that are more traditional business performance metrics and saw a difference between the digital business ecosystem leaders and others. So our leader group, they're more likely to report a stronger customer perception of their brands than their peers. 96% said that they're ahead in this area versus 41% of others. The same goes for the employee perception of the brand, 95 versus 53. We didn't talk about that on the last slide, but I think that will be really important now too, as of course, maintaining your employee wellness and everything is important at the moment. And talent is especially critical. And lastly, we also saw just higher revenue growth figures, so 6.7 versus 4.9. So not a major difference, but again, something that maybe suggests, once you look at all these points together, it suggests that the leader group is doing something right and getting results.
Right, and I got to be the buzzkill as always and say we do not claim causality here. We don't say people who are good at the ecosystem game are doing better in these areas because they're good at the ecosystem game. We don't have the sort of time series data that would allow us to make that claim. But as you said, Adriana, clearly these guys are doing something right, and we think there's sort of a virtuous circle there. And speaking of doing something right, I'm just amazed. We had 45 minutes, and somehow you did that almost exactly on the clock. And I guess we're going to head into the outro here with some questions. But wow, you got through a lot of data. We have so much data for this program. It's such a cool program.
Yes, definitely.
Sure.
I want to make sure we leave time for some questions.
Sure, absolutely. And firstly, before we take questions, I just wanted to thank you both for taking the time to delve so deep into the research results and sharing all these very useful insights. So with that, let's just open it up to questions. I already do see a lot of questions flowing in. So let's take the first question. How do you feel the results may have changed if this research was done after Q1?
I can start, Ed.
Sure.
I think a lot of the things that we saw would probably almost just be more emphasized in the data set. So we already saw a kind of focus on efficiency and, efficiency-focused innovation. I think that might come out even clearer if we were to refield the survey today. I also think there might be more of a focus on agility as a business outcome for these types of partnerships. And there might be more respondents that are reporting deeper relationships with their key partners. Because I do think that over the past few months, that kind of, the supply chain has been tested, business partnerships have been tested, and organizations were forced to work with their key partners very closely in order to, make it through kind of an unprecedented time.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Adriana. One of the great stories, the big stories we've seen in these difficult months is trend acceleration. So we saw the trends, we saw those 3-year projections, and I think a lot of these things are just happening faster because the sense of urgency is there. And I realize Oxford Economics is a statistical sample of one, so we can't put too much into it. But think of our own shop. Our CEO is an economist. We've always been focused on productivity and efficiency, but I can promise you, probably like the folks watching this webinar, those emphases have gotten stronger. Adriana, you mentioned working more closely with key partners. One of the great things that's happened for our shop in the last 6 months is we found out just how close some of our relationships are. We've worked with partners who we knew we had a good thing going with, but now they're maybe trimming their vendor list and they're coming back to us. And so these things are very real and even personal. And I'm sure for those of you watching this presentation, you can look at your own company and say, wow, that's us. That's happening here. Or if it's not happening, you can say, why isn't it? Maybe it's a good thing. You were already there. Or maybe these are things that you need to focus on.
Sure. I just wanted to remind our audience that they can always type in their questions in the Q&A module of the chat window here. And if we are unable to answer these questions within this limited period of time, then we will take the time offline to make sure to answer those questions. With that, let's go to the next question. What are the biggest influencing decisions for what are the biggest influences for CIOs in their decision making when it comes to digital business ecosystems?
I think that a lot of the strategic goals that we have been talking about, like efficiency and productivity and innovation, are also the top goals for the partnerships. I think I think that's an interesting thing about partnerships is that they tend to reflect the broader strategic goals of an organization. So when we see the priorities of CIOs flow right into their goals for what they get out of their partnerships, I think that's what we see.
Yeah, I think a goal that maybe a hidden goal, not that hidden, Adriana, since you mentioned it twice, is the talent story. I think one thing that CIOs are looking for in partnerships and their use of APIs is that developer story. There's so much talent out there. It's so dispersed geographically, and also maybe you don't need it full-time in your shop, or you can't afford it full-time in your shop, or however that plays out at a given company. People are looking to partnerships for that human factor to make sure they have the skills and talent they need to do what they need to do today, which isn't what they needed yesterday and may not be tomorrow.
And with the whole shift in the market that we are seeing today, do you think the goals for CIOs are going to change in the next 1 year?
I think it might be constantly changing. Yeah, I think we can just expect that everything will probably continually change. But hopefully, I think the thing that will remain constant will be the kind of flexibility to respond to those different needs.
Sure. Yeah, my crystal ball is so cracked right now. It's been a tough year on predictions. None of us had, disruptive global pandemic on our bingo card at the beginning of 2020. But I do think particulars are going to change. But I think the constants for a CIO are not just efficiency and productivity, but leveraging those things to create value in other areas. And exactly what that'll mean in 2021, none of us can say. Let's all hope it's a bit back more to what we thought was normal. But I think the idea of focusing on the basics to affect change at higher levels will remain a big priority.
Sure. So I think we have time for one more question. What are some of the differences that you see in the insights that you shared for various different regions?
I think one of the interesting things about the survey is just how much consistency there was across the different regions. I think in some of the slides that we showed, you could see that there were not major gaps between Asia Pacific and other regions. And I think that maybe points to the kind of the priority of this kind of partnership to organizations around the world, and also how people are probably working internationally too. You did see a bit of a higher number among our Asia Pacific respondents in terms of the kind of the depth of the relationships. I think we saw a slightly higher number saying that they saw their partnerships as really integrated. But a lot of the differences I would say are pretty small between Asia Pacific and other regions, and that may be a function of the industries we reached out to, or the fact that CIOs around the world kind of see these issues similarly, which is interesting in itself, I think.
You know, Adriana, a lot of the time, study after study, year after year, when we see a lack of huge variance from region to region, it bespeaks the newness of the subject, right? Where nobody's way ahead because nobody's that far along, therefore nobody's that far behind. And that's obviously a huge opportunity for everybody on this call. Back to that idea that when we look back from 2030, even the people who are way ahead now won't seem like they're that far advanced. This is an emerging concept. It's a concept that's continuously more accessible because technology is advancing, the API management platforms, the use of AI. So I think those regional variances being somewhat flat bespeaks the opportunity to everybody on this call to get out ahead of it and take advantage. And we've already seen some indications of the value that comes to leaders. So that's seems like a worthy goal.
Sure. Thank you so much, Greg and Adriana, for taking the time to walk us through all the insights. This is super, super helpful. I'm hoping the audience will also find it very insightful and valuable. So with that, let's close it off. I wanted to remind the audience once again that if you have any questions, please feel free to send an email to apogee-up-close@google.com. And I also wanted to request all the audience to check out the related links in our resource module, especially the Oxford Economics report itself. And the report goes very much in-depth, detailed into all of these topics. And we do have specific insights for the Asia Pacific region. So I believe that will be super valuable asset for all of you to take a look when you have some time free. Being a data-driven company, we also do like to get your feedback, analyze it for us to improve on the content and the presentation that we bring to you. So please take a couple of minutes to provide some feedback, and we really look forward to seeing you on another webinar. Once again, thank you so much and have a nice rest of the day.